Thank you for coming out tonight for our fifth and final lecture of 2024. I want to give a big thanks to AI Nebraska, who serves as our partner in the design lecture series. I also want to thank this evening's social hour host, Nebraska Masonry Alliance, for the charcuterie and the desserts. Go ahead and grab, during the lecture, if you need more, go ahead and go up there and grab them. They'll be there. And lastly, also thank you to all of our sponsors for their support of the design lecture series this year. The support has allowed us to bring in some really great speakers. And finally, thank you to the Benson Creative District with the support from the Nebraska Arts Council and the Nebraska Cultural Endowment for their funding support this year. A couple housekeeping items. If you are an architect and need CEU credits, the sheets are not scanning for whatever reason, so I did put a sheet at one of the tables to just sign your name and your AI number, and I will get that sent to AI Nebraska so you can get credit. Okay, with all that out of the way, I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker. John Sanders is a founding partner of Sanders Pace Architecture, created in 2002 primarily for a focus on design opportunities within Knoxville's urban core and its immediate surrounding neighborhoods. His passion for design can be seen on the challenging projects that he and his firm have been involved within those areas. John's work is meaningful, creative, and inspirational. His influence is evident in the thoughtful rehabilitation of forgotten, neglected buildings in fringe neighborhoods, elevation of overlooked project typologies, and energetic service through teaching and civic engagement. John was elevated to the AIA College of Fellows in 2018 in recognition of his contributions to the profession and was awarded the AIA East Tennessee Gold Medal in 2024 along with founding partner Brandon Pace. The gold medal is the AIA East Tennessee chapter's highest honor that can be bestowed upon one of its members. And he's also a recent Preservationist of the Year in Knoxville. POTY. So with that, please welcome John, everyone.
Thank you, Ross, for inviting me back to Omaha. And also thank you to all the supporting sponsors as well for such a wonderful lecture series. Seeing the lineup that has preceded me has perhaps gone against the rule of saving the best for last, as it certainly has been a talented lineup this season. So I have a lot to live up to tonight. It certainly has been nice to be able to follow along online as well with the series, so thank you for publishing them. But I will watch what I say tonight so I don't incriminate anyone that wishes to remain anonymous. So to start, I think it's always nice to give a little context of where we work. We practice in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains in the heart of downtown Knoxville. That's the Tennessee one, not the Iowa one, in a building we own named West Jackson Workshops. We are part of the Tennessee River Valley, governed by the Tennessee Valley Authority, and we are thankful for that. We were very lucky to be spared from the devastation that has affected so many East Tennesseans and our neighbors to the east in Western Carolina. I hope you will keep them and the folks in Florida in your thoughts, as I know we will. I'm here representing my business partner of 22 years, Brandon Pace, and myself, of course, and the other 15 people that make up our 17-person practice. I mentioned coming back to Omaha, and that comment stems from the last time we were both here in 2015 when we were invited to lecture as a part of the Hyde Lecture Series. And I think both Ross and maybe Mr. Trenelone had something to do with that initial invitation, since initial invitation and our friendship has been maintained since and reinforced with their reciprocal and independent trips down to Tennessee to share their work with us at the AIA East Tennessee Lecture Series and, of course, our state conference. I was also honored to preside over the 2015 Design Awards that year and was able to deliver the awards in person along with the jury comments. Now, if you didn't get an award that evening, please refrain from throwing the rotten fruit at me, at least until the Q&A session at the end. But in all seriousness, I do recall that time as I was most impressed by the caliber of work in this region and got to revisit some of it over the past day and was very happy to see that you've been very busy over the past 9 years since our last visit. And for some reason, I think about that trip daily, and I can't place my finger on it and why I do, but your chapter in this place has been on my mind since. I vividly recall a prompt from that time and maybe an inspiring and maybe even a challenge. So I'm here to share a little of that time since our last visit together. In our region, we are still working on a lot of existing buildings, doing adaptive reuse efforts, and sometimes even pure preservation projects. Our city is still renovating its existing building stock, and new developments are just starting to be constructed. I don't mind that our city is a little behind most similar-sized cities. It gives us a chance to be a little more intentional, maybe reflect on what others have done, what worked and what didn't, and maybe we can avoid a mistake along the way. But most of our existing building projects start with some sort of decay, an ill-advised addition or renovation that we find ourselves undoing. But sometimes we even get an opportunity to design a new building. And we have been fortunate enough to really transform a lot of the eyesores in our city into what we think is something really beautiful. Knoxville is turning into something that is really special and authentic, and I hope our efforts at Sanders Pace are setting that tone. A few of those transformations are included here to help capture some of the efforts that we have been associated with. One of those projects that has embodied all of those typologies is the Log Haven Artist Residency. That has elements of existing building restoration with the preservation of some 1930s log cabins mixed with new program-specific structures to support a new artist residency located in Knoxville, and specifically in South Knoxville, which is very important, which has a more rural and picturesque setting than you saw on that opening slide. Log Haven is just 3 miles away from our downtown core, but you would never know it when on the campus, as it feels totally secluded from urbanity. This project alone took 7 years, beginning to end, so that effort has obviously consumed a lot of time since our last visit here. We were fortunate to receive an AIA National Honor Award in 2021 for this endeavor, and that campus is now woven tightly into a very exciting and developing community for artists. Our other efforts within our office have created new breweries, restaurants, event spaces, mixed-use projects, and office spaces. But tonight, I'm not going to talk about any of those. I'm going to share something else, also in South Knoxville, but something that is a little more personal that I've been working on for the past 11 years. 2 of these images you see here mixed in with the rest is a sneak peek into that project that I've never shared before in a lecture setting like this. So I hope you'll be patient with me this evening, as I'm convinced that I'm perhaps a little too close to this one to even share it effectively with a group that most likely knows nothing about it. That is okay. I didn't know about it either, and I was living and working just a couple miles from it when I stumbled upon it in 2013. So the title of this talk tonight is Seeds of Regionalism, and it is because of the found condition of a very special place that I've personally become very acquainted with, named Little Switzerland. There is one in western North Carolina, and that one has been affected by the recent hurricane, but this one can be found just outside of our city, as I said, in South Knoxville. I've had the privilege to share it with a few of you in the room years ago, so I hope to have, if I have to call a lifeline from some of you, I may have to reach out to you this evening. I'm going to break up the talk into 3 segments. It's going to be the research, the work, and the future that will start to frame this now 11-year project that has made some appearances in our office, but I have to admit what you're about to see is mostly nights and weekends on my part. So it does not come with the sophisticated drawings and diagrams that we produce in our office. So let's get started. There's a lot of ground to cover. I think that's supposed to be a pun, but I don't know if it's playing that well. So I mentioned Log Haven and that 7-year project to make the point that yes, we can do real work for clients, but more importantly to make the note that our focus in that area of Knoxville has been robust over the past few years. We have worked with a private foundation on some of these art-based, civic-minded projects as well, as the city of Knoxville as part of their Parks and Rec department, focused on the enhancements in and around Knoxville's urban wilderness, which has become a destination for Knoxvillians and tourists alike. I'd love for you guys to come on down and see it. As a part of these projects, we have studied this region in depth, doing cultural and historic research studies while designing enhancements to existing parks with new structures and amenities, which is creating a new destination of interconnected trail systems feet from the core of our city. These planning and research-based initiatives have created a wealth of knowledge and added a layer of relevant history that was previously hidden from our surface level understanding of the region, and more importantly, has uncovered secrets and future potential that has yet to be tapped. During that time, we of course always look for the next project for our office, and we use many different methods to learn about what could be next. So I'm always drawn to even a house sale as a springboard for a potential next project. But what the heck does retro living mean? Well, I don't even know. But this post on Zillow and ultimately Facebook was more unique, and I started to study it. Brian Hand was a friend that doesn't post much, so the post was already pre-qualified, if you will. The more I started to study it, the more intrigued I became. And understand when I'm reading this is on a very small phone. It was like 4 a.m. on a Monday morning when I'm trying to sleep, but my mind won't let me as we as firm leaders are getting ready for a new week. Look, it had a cute name. It was so close to some of the new South Knoxville projects that we were actively working on, so I was becoming more familiar with the area and more interested in this post and the Zillow listing. But then I go to the listing photos. What is this flat roof structure that has the interior furnishings of my grandmother's house? There was much vegetation and blown out sun coming in from the blind covered windows that I couldn't really trust what I was seeing, especially on an iPhone 5. It was definitely unique for our area, and I'm pretty fluent in our city's housing stock. So I was surprised, or as excited as I was that Brian posted it, which I guess was the reason that he did it in the first place. But I still don't know what was retro about it. And then there it was, at the end of the scroll, the old black and white photos of the then with the now. What is this, and why don't I know about it? And more importantly, who can I convince to buy this so we can restore it? And yes, that was my immediate reaction. My mind went immediately towards marketing and to send it to some potential clients that I knew were looking for a house project. I think I sent it to like 4 or 5 people before the sun even came up, alerting them of this opportunity. And after a little more review, I could see why Brian was so interested, as his trails, named Helix Trails, which you see there in the cross, are adjacent to this house and the overall site. And as we knew, he was always looking for willing co-conspirators to expand the ever-growing trail system known as the urban wilderness. Now, please understand, I'm very well that these Zillow and Facebook references don't sound very sophisticated, especially in a room full of architects. But I'm trying to make a point, and that it wasn't some book or nerdy reason that led me here. I'm being brutally honest about how all of this unfolded. And also share that I was not simply in the market for a house. I'd been living in downtown, happily in condo conversions and converted warehouses, living the life of a bachelor, feet away from where I worked and played. But by sunrise, I think Brandon Pace had replied back to the email I copied him on to share to our shared client, and he simply said, "You should get it." And he knew my passion for restoring and preserving older structures, and as I had done on similar endeavors elsewhere in the urban core. But what was I getting? And more importantly, I had no idea that I would end up where I am to this date. But by 9 a.m., I had written a deposit check and scheduled the showing later that day, but I'd already started doing a deep dive on exactly what it was. The first Google search easily turned up the current owner, who had unfortunately recently passed away. The owners were Jim and Nancy Tanner, now both deceased, were somewhat well known mainly for their careers as ornithologists. Jim Tanner was the last person to document with firsthand research on the now extinct ivory-billed woodpecker. Nancy herself can be seen sharing those photos of that work, but she had also been written about recently for the upkeep of her historic house from our local preservation group. But as you can see with the newspaper article, but who was Alfred Klaus, and why don't I know more about his Knoxville homes? So here we go again, cue the next Google search. And that search found some basics. Alfred Klaus was a German-born architect, immigrated to America in the early 30s and became a citizen in 1935. But from the document led to many more searches. That led to a very deep expose on Alfred and Jane West Klaus's work in Knoxville. And this was all found in Eris Volume 1, Edition 1, where I was able to find a treasure trove of connections that I still reference today. And as an architect, this document gave immediate gravity to who they were with two salient facts. He had worked on the Barcelona Pavilion with Mies van der Rohe in his office in 1928 and 29, and Jane West was the first American female in Le Corbusier's atelier in Paris. I don't think I need to read much more to be convinced that this was like finding a 1948 Porsche with 2 inches of dust on it in a barn somewhere in a field. So why was a German architect that married a female architect from Minnesota living in Knoxville, Tennessee? Say that a bunch of times. Simply, he was there to work for the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA. He was recruited by Roland Wank in 1935 and was identified as a young architect with exemplary skill that would contribute to the housing department that they had set up. The focus of that TVA department was to provide housing for the massive amounts of workers that would be needed to build all of the infrastructure that TVA had set forth into motion within and for our region. And it was from that white paper that allowed me to also see how connected Alfred and Jane West were to many of the other now famous architects that we are all still drawn to. They included Mies, Korb of course, but also Johnson, Kahn, Louis Skidmore, Howe and Lescaze are even in there. Again, I'm doubting myself at this moment. Please understand, we have very few iconic or even famous buildings in our city, and certainly none that I knew of prior to this that were associated with two of the three modern masters. I can't recall exactly, but soon thereafter I learned that the Beverly Willis Foundation had identified Jane West Klaus as a pioneering woman of American architecture, and her feature was being written by a local UT professor, Abigail Sachs. With Abigail being local to Knoxville, she was easily contacted, and now I had someone other than Google to ask about this place that I was just getting exposed to. And through this connection, I was able to get the contact information for one of the Klaus's children, specifically Peter Klaus, who was their eldest son, who was still living in the Philadelphia area, and that's the Pennsylvania one, not the Tennessee one this time. So I reached out to him, and I was able to convince Peter to visit this place that his father and mother had designed and built some 80 years ago. He had not been back since he left in 1945 as a young child. Along the way, I was able to get additional resident and owner contact information through tax maps, so I sent all of them invitations and told them to bring things so that we could share with each other, so that I selfishly could learn what they knew of this place. I was able to meet Peter Klaus, Michael Kennedy, and Bill Glenn, who are integral to this story and now to my life. So we shared stories, and honestly, I had no idea what to expect. But I was able to learn more about Alfred and Jane West, but I also learned about the lives of people that lived here during and after the original occupants had left. I was experiencing what many had said in the past to me about preservation work. And it becomes more about the people you meet than the actual structure or house that you are asked to restore. Bill Glenn, who is here on the left, is the son of Billy Glenn, who was a TVA photographer that had moved into one of the houses the Klauses still lived in while they were in Knoxville. And what does every architect need in 1941 but a friend with a camera to take photos of their work? And when Bill came that day, he brought this lovely piece of orange Samsonite luggage, and within it was close to 100 original photographs and negatives of Klaus's work from this era. This is a sample of what was in the color-appropriate Samsonite briefcase that has become an ongoing resource for the reconstruction efforts and renovation efforts that have been faced with since. I won't hide it, as it was very emotional to be gifted with this type of firsthand original documentation, especially from the son that it had been entrusted with. In fact, when he handed it to me, I wept, as I knew how special it was the second he handed it to me. He was very generous to do so, and it will be forever utilized for the reasons that he gifted it to me in the first place. In it were these very high quality images that allowed me to gain a better understanding of what Little Switzerland looked like, and ultimately what renovations were needed to restore the structures to their original appearance. Also inside the case were original newspaper clippings that led me to the local online archive, where I was able to find around 50 articles on the Klauses and their work while they were in Knoxville. I think I've been in the paper twice. I was simply alarmed how ignorant I was about this place and their work. I learned that they had master planned 10 international style homes for Little Switzerland that were deed restricted of the so-called modern architecture, as the snip of the deed says in the lower right corner. And more importantly, it lists what cannot be built by the named styles and the so-called traditional. These words were simply amazing to read, especially in a legal document like a deed, to people like us that are focused on practicing in a contemporary way in the South. Only 5 of those 10 houses were realized, but they were all still in place on Little Switzerland Road. And now I knew the depth and breadth of what I had found. The 5 houses shown here in their original form were pure international style examples, and easily the most authentic pieces of modern architecture in our city, and certainly the only subdivision of modern houses in our region. A few other things I learned and deduced that day. Alfred and Jane West were the first owner, architect, developer, contractor of their time in this country that I have come across in my research. Please, if you know of another that predates 1939, let me know and I will stand corrected. But how did they become the owner-developers, and where did they get the money to do so? So I asked Peter, and I found that Jane West, his mother, was one of 14 children, and her father had written history textbooks for higher education purposes. It was the royalties from those textbooks that would fund this entire development. This is an early aerial photo of the overall development with all 5 houses built. So to date it, I think this would be around 1946. That shows its place along the ridgeline of Browns Mountain. But what I found in that briefcase was drastically different than the realization of what was still standing on 9 now New Street. Okay, and I know that was really fast and way too brief to fully explain all of the intricate details that are very necessary to get a handle on who they were and what they did. That is an entire book that has yet unfortunately been written. This next portion will cover the work on what has been accomplished to date. I won't be able to share it all with the limited time that we have together tonight. But the reason for this work is simple. If done well, we can finally use some historic precedents in our immediate area to raise awareness of the modern movement in the South, which hopefully will lay a path for new work moving forward. That goal is maybe vague and hard to quantify, but how this work can hold a place in that larger discussion, and more importantly, can it teach our local population about some valuable lessons that they should have learned some 85 years ago. I will use this diagram from the 1946 Progressive Architecture article on the overall development as I talk about each house that we have affected. During the explanations, I hope that you will see is an effort that is intended to honor the original work that was done in this most unassuming place. So I started with sharing the story about how I was introduced to this place in a very immersive way, but not necessarily about the house itself. One of the first things you will see are there are many different names or letters of the houses in the articles and documents. So I've tried to yet again rename them in a little bit more intuitive way, honoring some of those that lived there before us. So we'll start with House B, and that was Seymour Tanner House. Remember, Nancy and Jim Tanner lived there. The Seymour person, it's a whole nother lecture, which was, and this is the first one that I shared in the house that I still live in today. It was built in 1939, and in hindsight, it was the one that was in the best condition of the ones that I found to date, because Jim and Nancy lived in it for over 60 years and took care of it. Kind of. But when I say the best condition, I'm mainly referring to the exterior, which in contrast to the neighboring structures. Remember, I do say all of this with an active and severe case of renovation PTSD. The metal pressed shower tile would simply fall off the wall when touched. The kitchen was almost original and needed a full update. And I almost forgot about the fire in the electrical panel that was still full of fire extinguisher residue. That place was preserved, but not in a livable manner. There was much to do. I enhanced the interiors with new finishes, but the spaces remained where they were originally designed. I had started to establish the rules for future renovations. We would embellish the deed restrictions, at least on the interior, and follow the rules of the thou shalt must be modern, but we must maintain the exterior as originally envisioned and designed by the Klauses. You'll know why here in a minute. The central connecting stair was celebrated as it should be, as these are the first split foyer houses in the country, which allowed for a very compact and dense floor plate, which reduced costs while maximizing the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. Now, most of these houses are 3 to 4 bedrooms, all with 2 bathrooms within 1,400 to 1,600 square feet. These are wonderful examples of what we are all chasing now with this urgent missing middle housing crisis that most cities like ours are now facing. We know what the exterior should look like because of Bill Glenn's generous gift. So through redaction, we were able to capture the original design intent, mostly through traditional preservation brief techniques, including the masonry ones, and some simple moves like the removal of the awnings and the overgrown vegetation. Okay, so that was a very brief summary of the first house, and that one should be the end of the lecture. And it would be, if not me, then who mentality hadn't arrogantly taken place. Plus, as some of you also know, I was born without an off switch. We will consider that first one as my gateway drug into something that has turned into a lot more of an intense situation, and shall I say, a hobby. This next one I will share is very special, but it took 4 times as long and 4 times as much money. So I had shared this photo earlier. There was another person that I had mentioned but didn't celebrate enough, and that is Michael Kennedy. He is here on the left, and he has become a dear friend, and he's poured a lot of opportunity my way as he owned a lot of the vacant parcels that had not been built on, but he also owned this lovely little treasure known as the Redwood House, or House A. Redwood, well, it is red, but it wasn't always, and it always didn't have that sloped roof either. And it was the second house on Little Switzerland the Klauses themselves had lived in. And I've got to try to put some order to this. And so I've renamed that one Klaus House 2. And I'm going to do that one first because it's the order that I did them in. I can promise you it did not look like this when the Klauses lived in it. So deformed beyond recognition, the standard playbook would be established and deployed, which entailed getting it re-roofed immediately and keep it dry and remove all of the ill-advised additions as soon as possible. Then once it is stabilized, we will figure it out of what is left, and we will put it back as best we can. I wish it was more sophisticated than that, but the work is very meticulous, and every solution requires a lot of thought and some trial and error. But usually, it is always much worse than known and sometimes even structurally deficient due to the modifications that were made over the years. You're seeing that cross-bracing cut when they placed that lovely window air conditioner through the wall. You're also seeing the start of the paint removal process starting here at the front door. I think that area took like a week, and my shoulder was killing me just after that little bit. And it wouldn't end there, as the 9-step paint removal process of the original redwood siding took over a year, and I can promise you, you can still find red on the house without even trying. But the original redwood was mostly intact and was just waiting to show itself again. The ribbon windows were their own project within a project, and it was part of the reason this house took me so long to renovate. I removed the original sliding window panels, sanded the frames, removed the broken glass, and installed new glazing stops in an effort to preserve the original custom windows that the Klauses had designed originally and had shown in their original drawings. What I can now confidently say from firsthand experience is to never design and build your own windows, especially in a climate like East Tennessee. And that attempt to preserve them was a complete waste of time because the gasketing and hardware just couldn't keep insects and moisture out. So after trying to get many window companies to make and sell me some unusually short sliding glass doors and being dismissed due to the engineering department's ruling, I was faced to follow suit with what I still advise against. I used his drawings and recreated the originals with modern hardware and gasketing without creating dimensional discrepancies. I only deviated once to adjust the glazing pocket to accommodate a 1/2 inch insulated glazing unit to address the due south facing ribbon windows. These units were made of mahogany and not redwood for obvious reasons associated with this rare species. The interiors were enhanced and strict adherence to detailing was developed to honor the spirit of the original interiors without mimicking something that could never be replaced totally in kind. Wood was scheduled where wood was, and the floor plan and overall layout was only enhanced in the kitchen and bath areas, which is typical for houses of this era. The exterior has been returned to its original quality, while creating a centerpiece for the overall development that the Klauses left us to uncover. You can see some of the passive sustainable qualities of the house with removable solar shades over the rear windows with the obvious cross ventilation possibilities stemming from the operable windows on the front. And with all spaces filled with light celebrating the distant views to the mountains beyond. From the amount of documentation found and notes from both family, friends, and publication, I am certain the Klauses had felt that this was their best work in Knoxville, so we did our best to honor it and to uphold that legacy. Remember, he has named it House A, even though it was built fourth in the overall series. So that was what now I refer to as Klaus House 2, as it was the second house he lived in. So to confuse you even more, I will share a little of what's ongoing work across the street at Klaus House 1, which is just across the street, and it was the first one that he initially constructed. It's labeled here, though, as House C, even though it was their first. I can't make sense of any of that stuff. You may remember this style of house as it is based on a mirror image of the first one that we reviewed. But since this was their personal residence, they baked in some unique nuances to this one. Here you can see it in its early form from the early 40s. But again, we were blessed with this hot mess to begin with. The front had been added onto, a vestibule, if you will, was added to the porch area, but there was also a large addition to the rear that was the main living space for the previous occupants. All had to be removed, of course, in an effort to restore the district. Upon my request, they ended up leaving quite a bit of debris in the house so that I got the opportunity to remove the final 3 to 4 feet of stuff. But as we know, the good stuff, or at least the oldest stuff, would be on the bottom. I did find some blue line drawings, new window hardware that was still in the box that I would need, and some glass block that was missing from the front porch debacle. And as you can see, this thing was a bit foreboding to passers-by. I do love it when there's a property tax increase being considered, as the Google streetcar view hasn't been up on my street since 2012. Also, when the property vultures send out the cash buyer postcards, I always get something with a furry image similar to this one. If you want to get really curious, check out the 2007 view. I haven't been sharing many plans, but these houses are remarkable when it comes to how compact and dense they are. They're utilizing the never-before-seen split foyer entry, as we discussed, but with public spaces to the right and then the bedroom spaces to the left on this upper level. And that program breakdown translates to the lower floor as well, with all of the kitchens and dining spaces located on lower levels, and to the right of the stair in this plan, with the other 2 bedrooms to the left. This one has an outboard garage in lieu of the in-house one that mine originally had. So say it with me, 1,400 square feet, 4 bedroom, 2 bath houses. This is what we need to be building more of today. Basically, this is found middle housing in lieu of the missing middle that we are all looking for today. So this house is almost complete with its renovations, but there's not enough time to go too deep into this one because there's more to share. And hopefully another day we can get into that. So I'll be brief and let you take a look at the finished photos when they hit our website. But I will tell a story, as there's a theme that runs consistent throughout all of these houses. Of course, by chasing a National Registry domination, the accuracy of the exterior is imperative, so the focus on any exterior replacement part has been critical. I'd looked everywhere for a match for this missing window, and I could never find one. So I was almost to the point where I was going to commission one to be made, which of course would have had to be very expensive and never good enough to match the true quality of the original steel casement window. But sometimes we get lucky. This tank had been sitting next to the now removed addition and behind the original garage. The tank was removed right after the closing, and it was an easy Craigslisting moment for a free tank, and it left without memory. But it did expose and left its housekeeping pad. But one morning, I finally saw what had been in plain sight for over 2 years. That morning, the sun struck just right and was like, why is there steel in this slab? There are very few pieces of steel on the hill in general. So I knew it was a bit unique and a bit strange, but then I could see it. The exposed corner was in fact a window frame, but could it be the missing window? Well, let's get a jackhammer out and find out. So Rob went to work on it, and by lunchtime he had sent this photo of an intact window with some pretty impressive patina. By the next morning, we had gotten it back from the sandblaster, and it was primed and ready to go back into place. Seriously, in less than 24 hours after pulling it out of its concrete tomb, it was back in the house with glass in it and all of the hinges still worked. So the lesson we have learned holds true. Just about everything that has been brought up the hill over time is still on the hill. We just have to look for it or dig for it. We were very fortunate to have found this vital piece of the house's envelope. And as a sneak peek here, you can see the before and after captures about 3 years apart with a fairly rare snow for our region, although those events now seem to be ramping up also. And last but not least, and it really is the one that created the title of this talk, it is the one that I'm most excited about. This fourth renovation we simply call the Klaus Cabin, as the occupants of this one are a bit less known. Shown here, it is labeled House F, and it was built in 1940, which was third in order of their construction, just after Klaus House 1 and the Seymour Tanner houses. A lot of people think that this one was first based on the rustic nature of it. And this small cabin was used as a guest house for the Klauses initially, and embodies all of the characteristics of regionalism or regional modernism. It takes on the East Tennessee vernacular of a log cabin constructed from the felled trees from the house sites that had just been completed, and it marries it with a Bauhaus-inspired international-style ribbon window system focused solely on the view to the Smokies. Its siting was also sensitive to the rest of the district while maximizing its footprint by creating outdoor spaces on the flat roof deck, along with a covered outdoor space under the cantilevered portion to the rear, while still allowing a view over it from Klaus House 1 from across the street. This is another deed requirement regarding access to views. But in true fashion, it looked like this just a few months ago. This one too was almost beyond recognition. This one had created such a dramatic before and after possibility that the drive to get the additions removed has been very motivating and, as we say, satisfying. But my God, the weight on this thing. I'm going to click back and forth just so you can kind of register it. It's really hard to quite see, and I don't even think the original owners understood what they were living in. But we're coming for you, little buddy. We'll get you out of there. And the view from the street had a very negative impact to the district, so much that the State Historic Preservation Officer said it would be non-contributing if the district was ever to be submitted for consideration. Well, hold on. We are going to submit, and I guess we need to submit, or guess we need to fix that before we submit it. And as a sidebar note, we were told not even to submit prior to my involvement, as the SHPO thought that the district was too far gone. But we have shown them that the originals were still intact enough to create a National Registry district. They have backtracked on that ruling, and now they say it is eligible. So we will be submitting our first submission literally next week for their first review. So starting on April 6th, we embarked on a partial demolition process to remove all of the additions so we could take some photos of this iconic structure to include with our National Registry submission. It took a few months dealing with phasing, weather, and an extreme degree of care. It was calculated from the dumpster pulls that we removed about 29 tons of house, all by hand, to preserve what we wanted to keep underneath. And when we did, the poor little guy was feeling a lot lighter, so much so that the added columns were no longer bearing along the front edge of the cabin. Right after the load was gone, I was having to shim these columns up so we could keep them in place while we tried to stabilize and level the structure. The sequencing of the demolition removed two major additions, and as my friend Michael Kennedy of the Redwood House next door would say, it had been added on in the X, the Y, and the Z directions. The issue with the removal, of course, is that we needed to keep the cabin that lay beneath it dry and free from any further damage, so we had to roof it before the topmost roof was finally removed. This created some unique means and methods, so much so that we had to re-roof it ourselves, as no roofer wanted to get involved in such a backwards approach to their normal roofing projects. And as you can see from the archival footage, that the roof surface itself will start to reemerge as a social gathering space for the district. With this footage, we can realize maybe its intended use, perhaps a fenced yard to contain Alfred and Jane's 3 small children. It certainly is the only flat outdoor space of this scale and size on this portion of Browns Mountain. You can see in the family movie here one of Jane West's sisters playing with the three Klaus children, and of course Ref, their dog. It was explained that Jane West's sister was the lucky one that had this motion picture camera, and she would bring it with her from Minnesota when she would visit. Sharing this original sectional tracing shows its relationship to the slope site, the elevated and covered outdoor spaces, and just generally how awesome it is. It truly is one of a kind. I'll pause a minute as the eyes in the room hopefully are studying the section as I've done many times. And the plan, a little faded here, but I hope you can see the 50-50 split of program between public and private spaces, along with just seeing how simple, efficient, and site-specific this Bauhaus mulleted cabin is. And this is how it sits today, ready for the renovations, but at least I can send in the photos in hopes that it will be considered contributing, since most of its parts are still there. And this uniquely shows the Klaus's ingenuity with this hyper-specific influence. Dare I say that this is the birthplace of regional modernism? I'll let you debate that, as I'm clearly not an architectural historian. So this last section is about the future, or as you asked some 9 years ago, what's next? So let me try to explain some of the immediate next steps that I can see at this juncture. Well, I've been able to acquiesce all of the vacant parcels in and around the district shown in pink. The darker pink shows the last pieces that I have under agreement that I will close on in the near future. Honestly, I wouldn't be sharing any of this with you if they hadn't all turned pink to some degree, signifying my ownership or future rights to them, as I try not to bid against myself as a rule. The two other houses, one is a Klaus house that I'll acquiesce, and the other is a mid-century rancher where Miles Horton lived, and will be purchased in the very distant future, I hope, as I have plenty to do right now. And just as a caveat, Miles Horton was the person that taught Rosa Parks to not get off the bus. Very important civil rights activist. I'm confident, as you are asking yourself, what in the world am I going to do with 50 acres, 5 modern houses, and 1 mid-century rancher on a hillside in South Knoxville? Well, I am honestly too close to be totally objective. So I've hired our friends over at Port Urbanism out of Chicago and Philadelphia and engaged them in a master planning process. This process has included some use studies to help answer that question. They came up with a lot of collateral, and some of the ideas are already being implemented for the backwoods area. Some of those are for an exterior sculpture garden, and of course physical connections back to the local trail system that started this whole thing in the first place. The goal is to monetize it at some point, but I'm going to trust the process until the right idea reveals itself. By sharing this journey with you and others like you, I will undoubtedly open other doors that I haven't even seen nor considered yet. I'd mentioned Log Haven before, and now that it has an architectural discipline, we wanted to make sure our colleagues across the nation know about it. So I'd shared it with Mark Manack and Frank Jacobus with Silo AR+D. If you don't know these guys, Ross, you need to get them here next year. Look them up. They are fabulous people and great architects. Since I knew they were both very hands-on and active builders, I sent them Port's master plan and told them if they needed a site to pick one, and they could have it for their use if they were successful in their pursuit of a residency. They submitted this, and they were awarded a 6-week residency where they designed a folly using AI, which was then translated into working drawings towards an actual implementation session during their self-diagnosed and much-needed partners retreat. In true Manack fashion, they were done in the first 2 weeks of their 6-week residency, which left a lot of time for them to enjoy it, make art pieces from it, and to simply take a breath, as we all need to do from time to time. But I think we will have to wait for another year or so to catch our breath, as we have recently been awarded a main gallery space at our Knoxville Museum of Art to curate an exhibition for October 2025 of the work that Alfred and Jane West did while they were in Knoxville. This will be KMA's very first architectural exhibition, and we hope to let it travel elsewhere once it's complete. The notoriety of the work that the Klauses did is growing, and I hope that the awareness of the work that I am doing is raising a new conversation about historic and modern architecture in the South, as we are still battling some of the same issues that Klaus was experiencing in the early 40s. The work has been published in the Wall Street Journal and received a couple of national awards through Docomomo US and Residential Design Magazine. These awards are in contrast to what Klaus was fighting for at that time, and this spread in the journal versus this one from 1940 in the Knoxville News Sentinel, I think is still very relevant today, especially for people like us trying to practice in a modern and sustainable way, especially in the South. I'm going to close with one clarifying statement. I've said we a lot. I have to recognize who that is, and that's Rob Furig. This will choke me up, so hang on. Rob is the other half of we. He is the one that has been doing this with me for the past 11 years up at Little Switzerland. He doesn't own it. He's just a contractor. But he holds a bachelor's degree in architecture from the University of Tennessee. But instead of traditional practice, he took an alternate path and has been building since 1991, and with me specifically since 1999. And as Klaus needed a guy with a camera, I need a guy that can build stuff. He's the best non-architect architect I've ever met. And none of what you just saw would be possible without him. Sorry, it's tough. He's taught me more about construction and preservation than any one person in my career. And I will be forever indebted to him. So thank you for letting me share this work, and I hope I answered your burning question of what's next. You can check out some of the history on the website listed here. It's still being developed, but I'll leave it up for you to study over the next few days to hopefully backfill some of the story that I had to skim over tonight. I hope to come back in another 9 to 10 years, and maybe I'll be finished by then, but I have a feeling that it'll still be going on as I see no end in sight. So thank you very much. That was a really brief overview of the last 11 years of my life. And I would love to take some questions, if you have any.
This whole passion project that you put together here. I'm curious, a couple things. Do you know, and could you combine this, what these houses were selling for initially?
In the deed, yeah, sure. In the deed, it said they had to be $5,000 or more. I have the sales, real estate, like the ad. When Klaus sold Klaus House 1 to Bill Glenn, it sold for $9,900 in 1941. So you could do escalation from 41 up to that.
And then I guess the second part of that is, you mentioned you texted or sent this link to 4 or 5 people right when you saw this listing. What kind of person or are you looking for when you share this with friends, clients? Are you looking for a partner, or are you looking for a client?
Yeah, I mean, again, we started a firm in 22 years ago, and personally, it still feels like a startup business. So I'm still chasing work, and so any little thing becomes the next job for us. So 11 years ago, that was that moment where I see something, and of course, a lot of architecture fans, so to speak, would come up to us and say, "Hey, if you ever find something, let me know about it." And so, and we know that we've done some work with other people that might want to live out there. So, just trying to convince somebody. So not a partner, just a straight client. And that was my immediate knee-jerk reaction because, again, like I said, I don't even like houses. I think they're ridiculous. Again, it's really difficult to do all that type of work, especially in that climate. It's very, very harsh. It's really wet. It's really hot. It's really cold. It's all the things. So it really makes you a good architect in that way, to make you think about those things. Yeah, I think I bought my first condo conversion probably in '98, and that was a year after I graduated college. And there was a strong thread of other architects my age that were building, and it was kind of contagious. And at that moment in time, I don't know if I was I just thought that's what everybody did. I really did. I mean, I went over to Ross's studio and I felt like really at home. It was really lovely just because like that's what it feels like. And you know, you move on and get to a corporate firm and you kind of forget those roots. So like putting my play clothes on and building stuff is that's where you learn really. And that's why it's kind of emotional with Rob, especially because he's sitting there teaching me this stuff. I'm paying him, but it's like a 25-year post-professional degree that I'm getting from that guy. It's amazing. So yeah, and it informs what I do in my day job. So I can sit at the conference table and say with a little more authority than most, because I've done it, I've paid for it, I've messed it up, I've figured it out, and I can talk about it. So it does help our practice immensely, especially with the preservation work that we do. But building things is a passion for sure. And I think just making change is a passion too. And there's a lot of change, obviously, that's happening up there right now. I wake up every day and I try to change something every day. And then you don't know it. That's why it's so emotional to look back on it. I can't believe Rob's come to work every day for 11 years to do that work with me. And it's the most amazing job meeting at 7 a.m. every morning. We meet, we figure out what we're going to do, we point at it, we may draw it on a stud. I don't think we've done a set of drawings yet. And it's just there's no time. We just want to do it. And so it's kind of the way architects, I feel like, should be practicing in a lot of ways. It's if you don't do that stuff, you can't really do it in your office. I don't think you know how. So it's fun, really fun. Yeah, we have, we're next week we have Oktoberfest, and we have it up at Little Switzerland. It's our second year doing this, but all of the younger staff is just, some of the older staff is like, yeah, that's fine, but the younger staff really is very interested in it, and that is where the teaching can really start to happen in a more meaningful way for associates and emerging professionals and honestly any architect that's just never done that type of work. So, you know, there's a lot of people that'll come up there on the weekends and, you know, we'll throw down a little bit and do something, or if I need some help, or because again, it's just me and Rob. It's hard. It's sweaty. It's hot and it's cold and it hurts. Yeah, it's fun. The PA is 1946, February 46. If you find one, I'll buy it from you. I've got two, one that's in plastic and then the other one that I look at. Very, very special magazine. So, and it has all of them on there, and it's pretty unique. But as we go through, we were talking about history earlier tonight with one of the gentlemen back there, and we were talking about, you know, you can really start to unfold what's not right in history books. And Klaus not being mentioned in a lot of history books. I went to your bookstore down on, I guess that was Second, and I pulled a Mies book out, and it had all the collaborators in the back of it. And Klaus is missing. And I've got pictures of Klaus on the job site at the Barcelona Pavilion. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, that he was there. And there's a lot of pictures of him through time with Mies, but there's nothing about him doing that work with Mies. And so these disciples that get kind of left behind, or the ghost architect, if you will, from the modern masters, or somebody we need to be looking at, especially that first generation of those people that got indoctrinated, so to speak, in the right way. And then they left and started doing their own thing. So there's a lot of those people. Klaus is one of many, not just with Mies or Korb or Johnson, but and I don't know. I mean, we can argue about the work too. I don't even know if like his original work is all that great. I have arguments with the guy all the time in my head. It's like, why doesn't this line up, and why doesn't this like course out the right way? All the things that you would still say, and so, you know, but he was trying. He was getting after it too. I mean, he did all of those houses that we just looked at in 4 years. It took me 6 years just to renovate one of them. So like it's incredible what the guy was doing, and his handwriting is on every stud, and I can tell his handwriting. It's very unique. It's not even like an architect's handwriting. It's got a very unique stroke to it, and it's you can see his handwriting is on every stud, and he's doing the exact same thing. He did do drawings. I shared a couple of those with you, but he's drawing on every stud, talking to his Rob on site, and his Rob was a father and son, the Donaldsons. It was Charlie Jr. and Charlie Sr., and they built the houses with Klaus. And again, he was doing that on his nights and weekends. So TVA did not pay for that. This guy had a day job at the housing department. And again, I don't know how he did all that stuff. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Before you said something about letting folks get used to it.
Yeah, it's my favorite one.
So what do your neighbors think, and what do you wish your neighbors would think?
Well, leave. No, the two that are left, they get it, I think, but they don't care like I care about it. And honestly, I haven't shared. I mean, this lecture today is the first time I've ever put this together, and it's because I'm literally in real estate transactions for the past 11 years. I've been playing a chess game with a neighbor for a while just to try to get the opportunity to buy his house, and all it is an opportunity. I just really want to preserve it, and trying to convince people to trust you about preservation. I'm like, why do you care so much? I'm like, well, just because I do, and I don't know. And now that I've invested all of that, now I want it to be preserved as one piece. So what do they think? I don't know. They're very quiet. I'll just say that, and that's good. Yeah. Yeah, all 10 houses, we have all the original drawings, the tracings. And when we do the exhibition, we're gonna get our goggles on and go out to the job site and actually look and see what those houses would have looked like if they had built all 10 of them. So we'll do digital models, wear AR goggles, and be able to see them in place. So that'll be part of the exhibition that we do, which will be very exciting. I'll let you know what they look like, but I'm confident that the open space feels so good that it'll feel pretty crowded up there. And so that's where I don't think I would probably ever do it. I would probably leave what's authentic there. And again, as we know, those houses would probably be built differently if we built them today, especially how the spaces work, and bathrooms change sizes, kitchens change sizes, so they wouldn't be authentic, and so I don't know if I would want to attempt that out of respect, honestly. Sure. So right when Klaus Alfred moved to the States and immigrated, he worked on the PSFS, so the very first skyscraper in our country. He worked on the Barcelona Pavilion and then the PSFS. Like, shit. And then Jane West, she gravitated more towards interior architecture, but she was an architect. And she did, Klaus, after their children had grown up a little bit, you could see Jane West's work with Klaus's work when they did they did the federal courthouse in downtown Philadelphia. So if you go there just a few blocks down from the PSFS, you'll see the federal courthouse, and Alfred Klaus designed that. But then Jane West did some work inside of the building as well, like courtrooms and things of that nature that I can easily point to and say that they did. They also did work with Neutra on Penn's campus for the graduate student housing, the big green dorms. If you're familiar with Penn's campus, there's 3 of those buildings, and Klaus did those. So again, the work, this is his early stuff. Like, it's like any artist, like the early kind of stuff is kind of where the foundational work happens. It's probably a little more interesting, a little more gritty. And so once he kind of moved on in 1945 from Knoxville, he practiced, I think, another 50 years or 40 years in Philadelphia. He lived till like he was 98. I mean, the guy was in incredible shape, and he literally slept 4 hours a night every night of his life. That was kind of his MO. All of his children say that, and all of his grandkids say that. Did I use enough time, or did I do it too fast? Yeah, keep asking. I mean, this is a deep subject, so it's hard to, like, I don't know where to stop. Yeah, please ask. I mean, it's fun stuff. I mean, the Wall Street Journal article was a fun process to go through because, I don't know, Wall Street Journal doesn't really write about modern historic architecture very often, and they were so, it's that opportunity kind of came to me after the Docomomo Award. They picked up on the story, and I had a very sympathetic writer that really was interested in the work. But the editor of the Wall Street Journal that does this mansion section, all they really cared about was like, how much are you going to sell them for? Or how much money have you invested? And like none of this stuff matters. It's not why I'm doing it. So the whole time I'm like, I held all the, I'm not supposed to read the article because that's just the journalism integrity that they would like to keep. But I kind of stiff-armed them pretty hard with the photographs. I didn't give them the photographs until I felt that the article was heading in the right direction, which was about, not about money. It's more about the work that he did originally and how it can transform a whole place with these kind of deed restrictions and things of that nature that are really pretty fascinating to think about. Because I don't know if you guys do residential work, but you know, most of the house calls we get are for houses and subdivisions that have other HOA deed restrictions that are pretty god awful and you can't even do anything. And so to read these things is really quite fascinating. And I don't know if you read and really kind of read that deed restriction. I don't know if you can see it. I hope so. But it says, I'll read it to you if you can't read it. It says, no dwelling shall be erected on any lot unless the design of the so-called modern architecture, that's in quotes, as distinguished from and contrasted with the so-called traditional architecture, as exemplified by the English, Georgian, Grecian, colonial, and other types. So it's basically like, you do that stuff, you need to go somewhere else. So it's like, it's architectural racism. But to know that, that's a sharp contrast. Plus the scale of the houses are mentioned in the deed restrictions. They had to be a certain size. They couldn't be super small and they couldn't be super big either. So there was kind of this range. And also that had to do with the views and the view sheds across the streets, because all of these are looking at the mountains, and it says specifically you can't block the views of your neighbor's property across the street from the Smoky Mountains, which is the view that I ended with. And again, that's what that's the opposite way. Let's go this way, right. That's the view out the back. So you're looking at the Smokies there. And it's quite lovely. And Home Depot right there at the bottom of the hill. Which is very helpful when you live 0.8 miles from the Home Depot. And 1.1 miles from a Lowe's. No, when the Wall Street Journal did the article, the Knoxville News Sentinel called me and they were like, hey, we want to do a story. And I just said, about what? I just want to understand what they want to write about. And they were like, I don't know. And I was like, well, you have 50 articles on this guy in your archive. Why don't you start there and then call me back? And they never called me back. So I don't know. It needs to be talked about. I gave my first 2 tours last weekend. When we got the Preservationist of the Year award, we donated a couple tours and we had 12 people per tour come, and that was my first kind of opening up moment to local folks. And it's because, again, I'm trying not to bid against myself, because these sites are quite lovely, and pretty much 12 out of 12 people stand up there and they say, I've never known this was here. And I'm like, you're right, nobody does. And I didn't know about it, and you guys know about it now. So it's just a really bizarre place. It's kind of hard to get to from, not distance-wise from Knoxville, but it's just on a dead end, and it's kind of circuitous to get there. So it's not obvious how to get there. So that's been its blessing for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. say that last part again. What's the crux right there?
How hard is it to change the mindset of cash
Right.
to a marketplace?
Okay. Yeah. So I said trust the process, and so I mentioned Log Haven a couple times. Log Haven took us 7 years. On year 4, we were still fixing cabins without the knowledge that they were going to be an artist residency. And so I'm past that mark, of course, with years, but the same process happened. We are going to do the houses anyway. I'm going to fix those houses. So I don't, like, if I knew what it was going to be, it would just add more pressure to me that I don't need. I may do something differently. Yes, you're right. I may have wished I'd have integrated some device or something into the house, but if I'm being true to the preservation work, it's going to be what I'm going to do anyway. So I'm going to stay that course until I have to really flick over and then kind of decide. And again, I think once I start to share it, you're going to, I mean, that's just what happens, right? More people are going to kind of throw their 2 cents in, and somebody may come out of the woodwork, and then I will have to monetize it because this is my life savings up there. So I'm self-funding it. And, you know, things that I bought 20 years ago in downtown Knoxville are worth a little bit more than they are now, or were then. And so I have to sell those and bring that money up on the hill to do the work. So I'm just kind of moving pieces around. But in one place, it's kind of risky, right? We just saw a lot of devastation in our region, and one storm could wipe me out. So it's pretty stressful in that way. So insurance is hard to get. They don't want to insure them as much as they should. You know, all this stuff kind of comes into play. So I need to have that runway soon so I can get out. I mean, I would say in 10 years, I need to be out. So I'm 50 now, and I'd like to enjoy it a little bit before I move on. But I think at the age of 60, I don't know if I want to sit up there and do what I'm doing right now. Hopefully I'll be finished, but I don't know. I mean, the 5th house that I buy, I've never been into, and I won't go into it and probably until I buy it. So I have no idea the condition of that house, much less the 6th one. So, you know, and then if I start doing some of these master plan moves, like trail implications, and there's a water tower up there we might utilize for something. There's all kinds of little special projects that are pretty awesome and really creative, but take a lot of money. So it'd be nice to have a little bit of an engine behind it. I'm not a 501c3. I've passed that point. I would need to somebody gift the money so that it could buy me out. So I can't do private endearment on this stuff because it's all in my name. So it's kind of like it's gone too far at this point. So you kind of got to see it through, and then hopefully I can sell it more or less as one piece. I doubt I'll sell it as one house, but I could always fall back on that. They'd sell pretty quick and pretty easily. But I think there's a higher and better use. Honestly, for architects, I'd like it to be a teaching place of some sort, or a resort of some place where you would come and be able to think and contemplate, and maybe it's an architect's residency. I don't know. All these things are just kind of wild ideas, but I don't know if there's a lot of traction to any of them. Brian's been down. He comes to Blackberry Farm, which is actually in that view shed that we just saw. And I talked to him in DC. But you're right. I mean, he does it a little differently, though. He's kind of, I mean, there's something precious about these, and I'm not saying that his aren't precious once he finishes, but they are new. And there's a moment here where I don't want to renovate the thing I just fixed because somebody came in for a football game and, you know, got drunk and did something stupid. You know, that's going to hurt because of Rob, really. I mean, it's just like, God, we got to do that again. I've already sealed the Redwood house 4 times. So it's just like, it's constant maintenance. So it's going to break me at some point. I just don't know when. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This diagram is, I would say, more of an artist impression of what's there today. It's somewhat like this, but it's not like that exactly. No, there's this sharp. Let me see if I can use this fancy thing. This little guy right here. This thing's not there. There used to be a road that would go down, but you kind of come through here right now. The water tower sits right here, and there's something wrong with the scale to it. It's just not very. Again, it's an artist rendering. But the houses are ordered correctly there. I mean, if you were to line them up on the street, it would look like that. And we did, Ports, and they do master planning. They're landscape architects as well. They're also architects. But we're starting to work with another local architect that really would be more granular and more plant-specific selections and design work. So Port's kind of big picture stuff, and then there's be a local person that would execute those things while doing some of the nuanced work, like where's a driveway and where's a curb and these types of things that a master plan wouldn't necessarily carry. Oh yeah. I don't know where to put the car. That is part of the prompt right now. Where are we putting cars? Because even when I give tours, I'm like, don't bring your cars up here because you kind of ruin it. You want to be able to see what you see without the cars in place. All right.
Thanks so much, John.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming out. I'm glad John was able to tie up those loose ends with some of the real estate, and because I really wanted him to come out here and talk about this. I think it was about 5 years ago or so. I was out there at the Tennessee conference to give a talk, and we went out to John's place, and we were actually on the roof of the Redwood while it was under construction, and I was just blown away by what he was taking on and all the work that he had to do. But like the houses just looked amazing, and there's so much potential. So I've always been wanting to get him back here to speak about these houses specifically. So I'm glad it was able to work out, and maybe in a decade or less, I'm sure you'll let me know, but we can get him back out here to show his completed plan, I guess. So I don't know, we'll see. But thank you so much, John. This is awesome. Also, this is our last lecture for 2024 for the Maple Street Construct Design Lecture Series. So thank you everyone for coming out. Looking forward to having another 5 to 6 lectures next year. So thank you so much to our sponsors. Thank you to AIA Nebraska, Benson Creative District, the Benson Theater for having us here this year. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you all next year. So thank you.